This is the story of the black millionaire father saw the maid, let his disabled son lead a dance step, and his world changed forever as it truly unfolded. Marcus Wellington had built his empire on precision. Every morning at exactly 5:47 a.m., his Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floors of his Manhattan penthouse, each step calculated, each movement deliberate. The sound echoed through rooms filled with awards, photographs of handshakes with presidents, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of a city he had conquered. But on this particular Tuesday morning, something was different. The usual silence that greeted him was broken by a sound he hadn't heard in months. Laughter. Not just any laughter. His son's laughter. Marcus paused at the top of the grand staircase, his hand gripping the mahogany banister. Below, in the vast living room where sunlight streamed through crystal-clean windows, he saw something that made his breath catch. His 8-year-old son, David, confined to his wheelchair since birth due to spina bifida, was moving, not just moving, dancing. And beside him, guiding his small hands through graceful motions, was Elena, their housekeeper of 3 years. If moments like this touch something deep within you, consider joining our journey through these powerful stories by subscribing. Marcus had hired Elena Vasquez, not for her warmth, but for her efficiency. She was a 42-year-old woman from Guatemala who spoke little English when she first arrived, her references impeccable, her background check spotless. She cleaned without being seen, cooked without being heard, and most importantly, she never tried to engage him in conversation about David's condition. That was exactly what Marcus wanted. Someone who would care for his son without the pitying looks, without the careful words, without the constant reminders of everything David would never be able to do. But watching them now, Marcus realized he had been blind to something extraordinary happening under his own roof. Elena was humming a soft melody, something that sounded like a lullaby mixed with a folk song. David's wheelchair was positioned in the center of the room, and she knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. She moved his arms in slow, flowing patterns, up, around, down, like he was conducting an invisible orchestra. David's face was radiant, his usually pale cheeks flushed with joy, his dark eyes sparkling with a light Marcus hadn't seen since before the accident that took his wife 3 years ago. The accident. Marcus's jaw tightened as the familiar wave of guilt crashed over him. Sarah had been driving to David's physical therapy appointment when the drunk driver ran the red light. Marcus had been in a board meeting, too important to reschedule, too crucial to miss. He'd sent his wife and disabled son out into the world while he sat in a conference room discussing quarterly projections. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built a fortune in medical technology, creating devices that helped people walk again, yet he couldn't save his own family when it mattered most. After Sarah's death, Marcus had thrown himself deeper into work, building walls not just around his heart, but around David too. He hired the best caregivers, the most qualified therapists, the top specialists, everything David needed, except the one thing Marcus couldn't bring himself to give, his presence. Now, watching Elena guide his son through what looked like a traditional dance, Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. David was laughing again, really laughing, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Mira, David," Elena was saying in her accented English, "feel the music in your heart. Yes, your hands, they can dance even when your legs cannot. You are complete, mi niño. You are perfect as you are." Marcus had never heard anyone speak to David that way. The therapists were clinical. The caregivers were professional. Even Marcus himself had fallen into the trap of speaking to his son in hushed, careful tones, as if David's disability had made him fragile in every way. But Elena spoke to him like he was whole. David's voice, clear and bright, drifted up the staircase. "Elena, teach me the one where I can be the prince again. Ah, see the waltz where you lead the princess through the ballroom. But remember, a true prince, he dances not just with his feet, but with his soul." Marcus watched as Elena stood and moved behind David's wheelchair. She placed her hands over his, and together they began to move in a pattern that was unmistakably a waltz. Elena guided the wheelchair in slow, graceful turns, while David's upper body swayed with the rhythm, his arms moving in elegant arcs. To anyone watching, it would look like David was leading the dance, like he was in complete control. The sight hit Marcus like a physical blow. His son, his brilliant, creative, joyful son, had been dancing. How long had this been going on? How many moments like this had Marcus missed while locked away in his home office, building an empire that suddenly felt hollow and meaningless? Elena began to sing softly in Spanish, her voice carrying a melody that seemed to wrap around David like a warm embrace. Marcus didn't understand the words, but he understood the emotion, pure love, unconditional acceptance, the kind of nurturing presence his son had been starving for. As the impromptu dance continued, Marcus noticed details he'd been blind to before. The way David's posture had improved over the past few months, the way his coordination seemed sharper, his movements more confident, the way he smiled more often, spoke up during dinner, asked questions about the world beyond their penthouse walls. He'd attributed these changes to the expensive new therapy program, the state-of-the-art equipment he'd installed in David's room. But now he realized the truth. It wasn't the technology that was healing his son. It was Elena's simple, profound belief that David was already perfect exactly as he was. The dance came to an end, and David clapped his hands together, beaming. "Elena, do you think I could dance at a real ball someday?" Elena knelt down to meet his eyes, her weathered hands cupping his small face. "Mi amor. You are already dancing at the most important ball of all, the ball of life, and you dance more beautifully than anyone I have ever seen." Marcus felt tears burning his eyes, a sensation so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. When was the last time he had cried? When was the last time he had felt anything other than the cold efficiency that had carried him through the darkest period of his life? He started to turn away, to retreat to his office where he could process this revelation in private, but his movement caught Elena's attention. She looked up, and their eyes met across the vast space of the living room. For a moment, neither of them moved. Marcus expected to see embarrassment in her expression, maybe fear that she'd been caught overstepping her boundaries. Instead, he saw something that shook him to his core, compassion, not pity, not judgment, but a deep, knowing sadness for a father who had lost himself in his grief and missed so much of his son's joy. Papa!" David called out, his voice bright with excitement. "Did you see? Elena taught me how to dance. I can lead now, just like you used to with Mama." The words hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. He had forgotten that David remembered those moments, the evenings when Marcus would come home from work and find Sarah in the kitchen, how he'd take her hand and spin her around while David giggled from his high chair. Those had been different times, before the weight of responsibility and loss had turned Marcus's heart to stone. Marcus descended the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a mile. When he reached the bottom, David wheeled himself over with an enthusiasm that broke Marcus's heart. "Papa, you should dance with Elena. She's the best teacher in the whole world." Elena stood quickly, smoothing down her simple dress, her cheeks flushed. "Senor Wellington, I am sorry if I overstepped. I was just—" "Don't apologize," Marcus said, his voice rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Please, don't apologize for bringing joy to my son's life." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Elena's eyes widened slightly, and Marcus realized this might be the first real conversation they'd ever had. In 3 years, he'd barely spoken to her beyond giving instructions or discussing David's schedule. He'd treated her like a piece of furniture, efficient and necessary, but not quite human. "David," Marcus said, kneeling down to his son's level, "would you teach me this dance?" David's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really, Papa? You want to learn?" "I want to learn everything you've been learning while I've been—" Marcus paused, searching for the right words. while I've been away." What followed was the most extraordinary hour of Marcus's life. Elena, initially hesitant, gradually relaxed as she guided both father and son through the basic movements of what she called adaptive dance. She explained how she'd learned these techniques from her grandmother, who had worked with children with disabilities in Guatemala City. My abuela, she always said that dance is not about the body you have, but about the spirit you bring," Elena explained, as she showed Marcus how to position his hands to guide David's wheelchair in smooth, flowing movements. "Every person can dance. Every person can lead. Every person can be beautiful in motion." Marcus found himself moving in ways he hadn't moved in years. Not the rigid, controlled movements of his business life, but something fluid and natural. As he followed Elena's gentle guidance, helping David navigate the living room in graceful patterns, he felt layers of tension and grief beginning to peel away. "You're doing it, Papa," David exclaimed as they completed a particularly complex turn. "You're dancing." But it was more than dancing. It was connection. It was presence. It was the kind of father Marcus had been before fear and guilt had built walls around his heart. As the afternoon wore on, Elena shared more about her background. She had been a dance teacher in Guatemala before coming to the United States, working with children of all abilities. She'd given up that career to support her family, taking housekeeping jobs that paid better but fulfilled her less. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus asked during a break, as David practiced his arm movements independently. "Why didn't you tell me you were a teacher?" Elena's smile was sad but understanding. "You hired me to clean and cook, Senor Wellington. You did not hire me to teach or to love your son. But children, they have a way of finding what they need. Yes, David, he found me and I found him." The simple truth of her words hit Marcus like a revelation. He had been so focused on providing for David's physical needs that he'd completely ignored his emotional and spiritual ones. He'd surrounded his son with medical professionals and therapeutic equipment, but he'd forgotten that what David needed most was someone who saw him not as a problem to be solved, but as a person to be celebrated. As evening approached, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. "Elena," he said, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly, "I want to offer you a different position." Elena's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Senor, I want you to be David's dance teacher, officially, with a proper salary, proper recognition, proper respect for what you do." Marcus paused, looking at his son, who was listening intently. "And I want you to teach me too. I want to learn how to be present for my son again." The silence that followed was profound. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and David let out a whoop of joy that echoed through the penthouse. "Really, Papa, Elena can stay and teach us every day." "Every day," Marcus confirmed, and as he said the words, he felt something shift inside him, like a door that had been locked for years finally creaking open. But the story was far from over. As the weeks passed and Elena began her new role, Marcus discovered that his son's transformation was just the beginning. Word of their unconventional arrangement began to spread through their social circle, and the reactions were not all positive. Marcus's business partners questioned his judgment. His late wife's family expressed concern about inappropriate boundaries. Some of the other wealthy families in their building made pointed comments about the help overstepping their place. The criticism reached a crescendo during a dinner party Marcus hosted for potential investors in his latest medical technology venture. As Elena was serving the main course, one of the guests, a prominent surgeon named Dr. Harrison, made a comment that changed everything. "Marcus, I have to say, I'm concerned about this whole dance therapy situation." "Doctor," Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "That woman has no formal training, no credentials. You're risking your son's development by indulging in this folk remedy nonsense." The table fell silent. Marcus felt every eye on him, waiting to see how he would respond. 6 months ago, he might have agreed, might have made excuses, might have promised to reconsider. Instead, he stood up. "Dr. Harrison," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel, "in the past 3 months, my son has shown more progress, emotional, physical, and social, than he had in the previous 3 years of conventional therapy. Elena has given him something that no amount of medical intervention could provide, the belief that he is perfect exactly as he is." Dr. Harrison's face reddened. "Marcus, surely you're not suggesting that some untrained immigrant woman knows more about treating disabled children than qualified medical professionals?" The racist undertone in the comment hit the room like a slap. Marcus felt his anger rise, but before he could respond, a small voice cut through the tension. "Elena isn't untrained," David said from his position at the table, his young voice clear and confident. "She's the smartest teacher I've ever had. She taught me that I don't need to be fixed because I was never broken." The profound wisdom in his 8-year-old son's words left the entire table speechless. Marcus looked at David, really looked at him, and saw not the disabled child he'd been protecting and pitying, but a strong, confident, articulate young man who had learned to advocate for himself and the people he loved. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have stood up for what you knew was right, even if it meant challenging everything your social circle believed? Marcus made his choice. He asked his guests to leave, as the last of the dinner party attendees filed out in uncomfortable silence. Marcus found Elena in the kitchen, quietly cleaning dishes with tears streaming down her face. "Elena," he said softly. She looked up, her eyes red but her chin raised with dignity. "It is okay, Senor Wellington. I understand if you need to let me go. I do not want to cause problems for you or for David." Marcus shook his head. "The only problem I have is that it took me this long to realize what you've been giving my son. What you've been giving both of us." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Elena, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. What do you see when you look at David?" Elena's answer came without hesitation. "I see a boy who loves music and stories and making people laugh. I see someone who thinks deeply about the world and asks beautiful questions. I see a teacher who has shown me that strength comes in many forms. I see—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I see David, complete and perfect and exactly who he is meant to be." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "And when you look at me," this time Elena hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "I see a father who loves his son so much that he's afraid of not being enough. I see a man who has forgotten that love is not about being perfect, it is about being present." The truth of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. For 3 years, he had been so afraid of failing David the way he felt he had failed Sarah that he had failed him in an entirely different way, by not being there at all. "I want to change that," Marcus said. "I want to learn how to be present. Will you help me?" What followed were the most challenging and rewarding months of Marcus's life. Under Elena's guidance, he began to see his son and himself through entirely new eyes. The daily dance sessions became a cornerstone of their routine, but they were just the beginning. Elena introduced them to a whole community of families dealing with disabilities, people who had learned to find joy and strength in circumstances that Marcus had only seen as limitations. She connected them with adaptive sports programs, inclusive art classes, and support groups where David could meet other children who shared his experiences. More importantly, she helped Marcus understand that his role as a father wasn't to fix or cure or overcome David's disability. It was to love and support and celebrate the remarkable person David already was. The transformation wasn't just in David or in Marcus. It rippled outward in ways none of them had expected. Marcus began to restructure his company, shifting focus toward developing more inclusive technologies and hiring people with disabilities in meaningful roles. He started a foundation dedicated to adaptive arts programs, with Elena as its first director. But perhaps the most profound change came in how Marcus understood success itself. For years, he had measured his worth by his wealth, his influence, his ability to control outcomes. Now he was learning to measure it by his presence, his connection, his ability to see and celebrate the people he loved exactly as they were. The real test came almost a year later, when David expressed interest in performing in his school's annual talent show. The old Marcus would have found excuses, would have protected his son from potential embarrassment or failure. But the new Marcus, the father who had learned to dance, simply asked, "What would you like to perform?" David's answer was immediate. "I want to dance. With Elena and with you, Papa." The night of the talent show, Marcus stood backstage with his son and Elena, all three of them dressed in formal attire. David wore a small tuxedo that made him look like a miniature gentleman. Elena wore a beautiful dress that Marcus had insisted on buying for the occasion, and Marcus himself wore the same tuxedo he'd worn to his wedding, a choice that felt like bringing Sarah's memory into this moment of joy rather than grief. "Are you nervous, mi niño?" Elena asked David, adjusting his bow tie. David shook his head, his face serious but confident. "No, I know who I am now. I know I'm enough." When their turn came, they took the stage to a hushed auditorium. Marcus positioned himself behind David's wheelchair, while Elena stood to the side, and together they began the routine they had practiced for months. A beautiful, flowing dance that showcased David's grace and strength rather than hiding his disability. As the music swelled, David conducted the movements with his arms, while Marcus guided his wheelchair in smooth, elegant patterns across the stage. Elena joined them for the final section, and together the three of them created something that was more than dance. It was a statement about love, acceptance, and the beauty that emerges when we stop trying to fix what was never broken. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes. But more important than the applause was the look on David's face. Pure joy, complete confidence, the radiant happiness of a child who knew he was loved exactly as he was. Later that night, as Marcus tucked David into bed, his son asked a question that would stay with him forever. "Papa, do you think Mama would be proud of how we learned to dance?" Marcus thought about Sarah, about the woman who had loved David unconditionally from the moment he was born, who had never seen his disability as anything other than one part of a perfect whole. "I think Mama is dancing with us every time we dance, David. I think she's been waiting for us to remember how." As Marcus turned off the lights and headed toward his own room, he found Eleanor waiting in the hallway. In the year since she had become David's official teacher and his unofficial guide back to fatherhood, their relationship had evolved into something Marcus had never expected, a deep friendship built on mutual respect and shared love for an extraordinary little boy. "Thank you," Marcus said, the words carrying the weight of everything she had given them. Elena smiled, the same warm, knowing smile that had first captivated David in the living room that morning so many months ago. "No, Senor Marcus, thank you for letting me love him. Thank you for learning to love him the way he deserves." As Elena headed to her own room, she had moved into the penthouse months earlier, becoming not just an employee but a member of their family. Marcus stood alone in the hallway, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had built an empire on the belief that everything could be fixed, improved, optimized. But Elena had taught him something far more valuable, that some things don't need to be fixed because they were never broken in the first place. She had shown him that love isn't about changing people into who we think they should be, but about seeing and celebrating who they already are. The next morning, Marcus woke not to the sound of his own footsteps echoing through empty rooms, but to the sound of laughter drifting up from the living room below. David and Elena were already at their morning practice, and without hesitation, Marcus headed downstairs to join them. As he entered the room, David looked up with a grin that could light up the entire city. "Papa, Elena was just teaching me a new dance. Want to learn it with us?" Marcus smiled, kicked off his expensive Italian leather shoes, and stepped onto the dance floor in his socks. "And Brie, I thought you'd never ask." And as the three of them began to move together in the morning sunlight, Marcus realized that this was what success really looked like. Not the view from the top of a skyscraper, but the view from the center of a family that had learned to dance together through life's most beautiful and challenging moments. The music swelled around them, Elena's gentle humming providing the soundtrack to their movement, and Marcus understood that this was the dance that mattered most. The dance of presence, of acceptance, of love that sees no limitations, only infinite possibilities. In the end, it hadn't been about teaching David to overcome his disability. It had been about teaching Marcus to overcome his own, the disability of a heart that had forgotten how to be present, how to see beauty in imperfection, how to dance with life exactly as it is, rather than as we think it should be. And in that sun-filled room, with his son's laughter echoing off the walls and Elena's wisdom guiding their steps, Marcus Wellington finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy, not in money or power or control, but in love, in connection, in the simple, profound joy of being exactly where you belong. If this story reminds you that the most important dances in life happen not on grand stages, but in quiet moments of connection, share it with someone who needs to remember that we are all perfect exactly as we are, and that love is the music that makes every step beautiful.